I'm going to combine something here. We have a question from one of our board members and also a question on a 3x5, and they are related. I'll do the question 17 first. It says, I believe there was a spill that occurred in February. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm gonna let John, who knows an awful lot about the spills.
Okay. And the second part of that question is that we've actually had two major spills, and yet they are still allowed to continue with a permit. And so I guess the question is why wasn't the permit suspended?
I believe that I want everyone to hear. Thank you. Well, during 2011, well, during Tropical Storm Lee, let's put it that way, in September of 2011, well, everything did. These guys did, you know, everybody did. It was a shame, and well, the Broome County leachate was authorized to go in there at that time, but the Seneca Meadows landfill leachate was not coming down here. Does that answer your question, sir?
Well, there's leachate.
Well,
You're issuing a permit where the chemicals go large, you know, alcohol one, alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm not sure I'm getting your question. No, we you know, it's unfortunate for sure that spills happen, and you know, if
I remember you 12 years ago saying that rules on our board, this is a high concentration.
mm-hmm. Well, I have to say that, and it is unfortunate, you know, and John can attest to this, we as an agency handle, just in our area, our 9-county area, maybe close to 1,000 spills a year. It's not something that, well, people are hauling gasoline and storage and you know, it's something that these tankers and gas stations all have issues, and you know, we are left with there is, if organizations, whether they be municipal entities or private entities, if they meet the regulatory threshold for a permit, our agency has the obligation to issue them a permit. That's the fact of how it operates in New York. Not unlike if you are capable of driving a car, you're allowed a license to drive. Some of us are better at it than others, but I have to say that, you know, it is something that we have to deal with, and we try our best to regulate it, but there are so many that, you know, accidents happen, and they do need to be cleaned up, they do need to be addressed, and that's a big part of what John does all day and every day. But you know, that's, I mean, I put it rather simplistically. I don't mean to insult anyone,
Well,
but it's good to have the perspective.
Can we be a little bit more definitive?
Sure. Yeah, we'll get to the specific.
Well, here's what I want. Here's what I want to continue. I want to ask, what spilled? What was the volume? From which tank? What was the cause? And do you have a tank inspection program? That covers 18, 19, and 20. It's the specifics that we're interested in, obviously, for obvious reasons. And I appreciate your comment about the number of spills that you have. You're obviously shorthanded at DEC, and maybe we should talk to the governor about that. But nevertheless, you are in control of the permits, and you have to take action when there's spills. When you see it from our perspective, not just the board, but all the people here in the audience and all the people in the village of Endicott, they are smelling something that is a horrible smell when they go grocery shopping. And we are also a community that is trying to recover from a major chemical spill of in excess of 200,000 gallons of toxic chemical waste and materials. And there's been cancer studies, there's been studies on the workers, and so I hope you can appreciate why these questions are pointed and why people in the audience and the board members are being pointed about getting the answers, because this whole community is very sensitive to the idea that if there is additional toxic fluid of some kind, whether it's fracking waste or whether it's landfill waste or whatever it might be, and it's coming into the village of Endicott for whatever reason, whether it's to make money or to enrich somebody's pockets, or if it's simply to do a good service for the community, the negatives outweigh the positives. And this is why we're asking these questions, and this is why there's so much sensitivity about it. And
I can appreciate that. I mean, I can't pretend to know everything that you've gone through with the whole IBM issue, but you do know, Rick, that I'm very familiar with it and was very engaged with it, and still am a very long time later. That being said, I didn't mean to seem evasive. I was really just trying to answer this gentleman's issue, and John has prepared, and I'm very happy to let him speak rather than have you get bored with me.
Well, thank you. Yeah, specifically the leachate spill. Okay. Specifically the leachate spill that occurred in February of 2013. This involved the wastewater treatment tank, the bioreactor, what they call Tank 1. They started receiving tanker loads from Seneca Meadows. They received their first 2 tanker loads of 16,700 gallons. And at that point, they did have a leak from the tank. There was a flange that was corroded, leaking. At that time, you know, they did hire a local cleanup contractor along with their team to start recovering the leachate on the ground. They hired a local cleanup contractor, Gary Dyer, who came in with his vac truck. They backed up the product. At that same time, they pumped it from that tank that was empty originally into their other bio tank, number 2. So subsequently, they recovered 4,200 gallons that came out of the tank. So what remained was the leachate that soaked into the soil. So as a result of that, we identified an area, and obviously the concern that we have as the department is, look, we have leachate that's spilled to the environment, you know, and what is it going to impact? What kind of resources? So initially it would be, is the groundwater going to be impacted? So at that point, said, look, you're going to have to excavate soil. Now, remember, this happened in February, this kind of weather. We didn't have the snow like we do now, so the ground was somewhat frozen. Obviously, some of the leachate did impact the soil. They did excavate an area approximately 25 by 30, about 1 foot down. And we asked them, look, you're going to have to take some soil samples to confirm that we don't have any of the target compound chemicals that are in the leachate, which they did, and the results were favorable. They were below any type of soil cleanup guidelines, and again, based on each individual spill, you know, you have to assess, you know, what happened, how it was contained, as far as the responsible parties, and then again look at receptors And in this case, it looked like they did a good job. They were lucky that a small amount entered the catch basin, 5 to 10 gallons. They were able to plug that catch basin, the workers, and start recovering the product. Their cleanup contractor arrived, and within approximately 4 to 5 hours, they had everything contained. A day or two later, they excavated the soil. We did ask them to keep the area, not backfill with clean soil, just to make sure. Do we have to go back and excavate more? Do we have to ask them to do a groundwater investigation? And it came out very favorable. As a result, they did some work to their tank. They had what I would call some sort of skin or metal skin on the outside that on their flange, which they didn't see, was corroded. They made those repairs all the way around the tank, and at a certain point, they started using that tank for the leachate.
Are there any other tanks that are used for that?
Well, the Seneca Meadows leachate goes into the Biotank 1, and that is pumped into Biotank 2 as far as treatment. So it's sort of like, I guess, a pre-treatment or a holding tank.
Have you been able to inspect one or the other or both those tanks in lieu of the actual equipment failure?
No, I have not.
So we still don't know if possibly the other tank could have a similar accident in any given time.
Well, remember that, let me just point out that second tank is actually part of the treatment plant operation. That's been used all along and is handling all of the EIT waste. It also takes the Broome County waste into there. It's been operated for a long time. I think the issue with Tank 1 was that it was vacant. It wasn't being used, and therefore, there were just some maintenance issues that occurred with that. They had that rusty flange nozzle, so that hadn't been used. But the rest of it is being used, and they do regular. There are regular inspections that need to be done for the permit. Those are things that we would check when we're there. We would look and see. I mean, they're above ground tanks. It's not like they're buried tanks. I'm sorry. Okay.
I had photos too.
Well, I didn't.
No.
And so that goes to, if you don't mind me, I hate to belabor this, but that goes to the self-reporting, self-policing basic procedure that you had with the new company through DEC, whereas if you don't check or inspect their equipment ahead of time before they start accepting or doing some sort of process that they require a permit for, then you're relying on them to do that inspection themselves. That would say basically.
In most cases, yeah.
So how does that qualify them for a permit?
Trust me, it's in their best interest to do appropriate maintenance. These are expensive facilities to build, they're expensive facilities to operate, but the bottom line is, Rick, that they are responsible for maintaining that facility. They're required to do so under their permit. When John came on scene, he required them to do a cleanup that I'm sure cost them a lot more money than if they repaired that had they seen it and known about it. I mean, and these things happen.
I understand that, Mary Jane, and I don't mean to be so pointed about it, but obviously, I was a former engineer at IBM. I worked there for almost 30 years. I was very well familiar with all the activity. I was an electrical engineer, but I was familiar with all the activity inside that plant, including the waste treatment and the facilities maintenance people. And I'm very well aware of the maintenance training that went into the people that had to take care of that equipment. And I'm also well aware that in 1979, IBM had a spill of 4,100 gallons of methylchloroform, which was equipment failure. It was an equipment failure. maintenance guys missed that. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was loud enough.
Okay. The maintenance guys missed that. So I guess what I'm trying to drive at here is that when a private company is self-policing and they break their own rules, unless the agency such as yours or the community such as us is able to call them on it, and usually, you know, they have to notify us. Oh, we made a mistake, by the way. We had an equipment failure. So we'll go to the press and we'll publish an article saying this is what happened. That never happens. And consequently, things that go wrong stack up over time until you get to a point where you have this gigantic plume under the ground, which is what goes to my first point. Whether there was equipment failures or it was deliberately done, it was a matter of self-reporting. That's what it was a matter of. Until you were notified, or let me say, not you personally, but the DEC was notified, IBM and subsequently EIT was able to conduct their business on their private property and in a manner which was best suited them. And the community and the water supply and all those things took second or third or fourth or 10th on the list. And this is what I'm talking about. My point is self-reporting is not enough. And for those who are against regulations so that business can grow and we can have a free market economy, this is an example of why that can be disastrous for communities, and we're a perfect example of it. So my point is, and I'm not really yelling at you, but I'm just trying to make the point, we don't accept the idea that self-reporting is something that we have to live with.
I'm going to...
I understand you say 4,200 gallons leak onto the ground.
No, that was what was recovered.
Microphone?
That was what was, well, that was, as far as an estimation, it's really undetermined. Now, I can say the tank itself held 16,700 gallons. So as a result, they were pumping that out into the other tank. They were recovering it as it was coming out of the tank. And at some point, they were recovering majority of all the product. You know, so at some point there was leachate that did soak into the soil. So again, based on the cleanup that they did, they excavated 40 to 50 tons of soil, and then subsequent soil samples to verify was there any of the leachate contaminant there, that they sufficiently removed what was in that soil. Now, it's very difficult to determine the actual amount that was in that soil, but again, by soil sampling and looking at the time that the spill occurred and how they responded and acted to contain and recover the product, it was minor. I'm not familiar with that law. I mean, under their speedies requirements for this particular spill, their requirement would be a 24-hour notification to the department. And they actually reported to us approximately 4 hours after that occurred. And they reported to the DEC spill hotline. Within their speedies, I believe their requirement would be to notify our Division of Water.
And you went?
Right, I responded, yes. I don't know, it was a work day. It was, yes. Back in 2006, yes. Yes. Correct, and that's because like at this time, if it happened now, a glycol spill, that's considered a hazardous substance that's regulated, and that leachate it's basically industrial wastewater. Correct. Yeah, some did get into the storm drain system, but the workers were able to cover that drain and then create some trenches by hand. It may be, it's possible.
Clean water is all I'm referring to is the Clean Water Act of 1999. It says that all wastewater facilities that collect waste must notify the public of water facility owners or operators must issue a press release as to discharge of surface waters of 1,000 gallons within 40 hours.
Once you respond to that, we have a lady who would like to ask a question, but go ahead and respond to that.
Yeah, state it.
Well, I think what, have you seen the permit that you issued to them? That talks about how they report to it. That's what they need to do. If you find out they didn't do that, then of course we have discretion with enforcement. They did report to us in the required time. Yeah, I'm not aware in New York that we have that requirement. I've never heard of anyone else doing it. Well, I'm not so sure. I guess I'm not aware of that. Yeah, sure. I'm not aware, and I've not heard of anyone ever doing it, and it's never come up before. So, it says it was ratified by the North Carolina General Assembly. Sometimes things are less than clear, but that's.
Jim, we'd like to have somebody ask a question here.
Hi. What's disturbing me the most about all this is you seem to be not willing to accept or really investigate the idea that the leachate, which you're saying did come from Seneca Meadows, that Seneca Meadows accepts fracking drill cuttings. Do you accept that fracking drill cuttings are radioactive? Because I'm concerned you're not testing for that. So you're saying, well, it spilled and we were able to excavate and this and that, but you're not testing for radioactivity, and things are moving around. And I live right in the village of Endicott, and there are enough problems here. There's more than enough toxicity to go around. And, I don't want this to go on and on while this leachate continues to come from Seneca Meadows, where it's pretty clear that they're taking fracking drill cuttings. Those things are radioactive. There's no treatment plant in the world that can remove that radioactivity, and I don't want any of it in our drinking water, not even a little itty-bitty bit.
I can certainly appreciate that. I'm really sorry, but I have to disagree that Seneca Meadows is taking fracking shale or flowback sand. We have no evidence that that's going on.
Can you just test for radioactivity though?
Well, actually, Seneca Meadows has a radiation detector at their facility that they use all the time. They do. They check what comes in for radioactivity. Now, do you have that substantiated? I would love to follow up on that. If you can get me something, I will follow up on that as absolutely.
Instead of relying on you test for when something spills and it's from Seneca Meadows, can you do your own testing to make sure things aren't radioactive, that you're scooping up in the soil that's contained? And is that another one of those self-regulation things? Yeah. I mean, nobody wants to. What verification, what measurements do we have that we know definitely? I mean, this is something you can test for, can't you?
You can test for, I'm not a radiation specialist, but the department has them. But my understanding is that the waste that comes into Seneca Meadows goes through a radiation detector. And if that load, if it's, and it happens at, the facilities say that do accept the fracking shale, there are facilities in New York that do accept it, right? You're aware of that? But it's not Seneca Meadows, which if anybody has some concrete information, I will follow up on that because that's not our understanding. And it's our job to have that understanding. But we are aware that there are a couple of facilities nearby that do take that material, and they do too have radiation detectors that are required by us. And that shale, that fracking waste coming in is not tripping the radiation detectors. And those detectors are set very, very low. And my understanding is that the radiation detectors, since they've been taking this waste, have gone off twice. And each time it was not the load, it was the driver. So that's the level we're talking about here. Now, that just gives you a little perspective. But Seneca Meadows waste goes through radiation detectors. If the radiation detectors go off, that waste is segregated, stopped, and it's figured out what's in there that's causing that. And then typically what happens is our radiation people do show up on the scene if they can't figure it out. And then that waste load or something is in there. Oftentimes it is medical waste, but that is segregated out and handled at a different type of facility, okay? So I'm not taking this lightly, but again, you know, we're at the point where, you know, I said before, we require people to sample for things when I can justify it. I would love to have a lot more environmental information out there, trust me. I'm very conservative. I tend to want an awful lot more, but I have certain regulatory authority. If I don't have a good justification for saying to someone, you must sample for A, B, C, D, and E, then they're going to say to me, why? I don't even use these things. There's no justification to sample for these things.
Could we ask as a community or as a group, if there was a way that DEC, Endicott, Broome County, in sort of a, I'll use the word coalition, could set up a contact checkpoint time frame, like maybe whatever it might be, weeks or months or whatever, where you could get the answers to some of these questions in regard to, one, is fracking waste or fracking clippings coming into Seneca Meadows or not? Answer that question.
I have researched that every which way to Sunday. I mean, I said before I came because I knew that was a concern. Okay. I cannot verify. I have information.
We have somebody here that's already said that you know, and there are other people that I've spoken to before this meeting that have seen trucks leaving Dimick, Pennsylvania, and headed straight for Seneca Meadows.
Okay.
That isn't necessarily a conviction,
no,
but it is certainly an indictment.
I'm not a lawyer. I'm an engineer. I'm not sure indictment, but you know, we need a little bit more information than that. But I will tell you that I checked. I spoke with our solid waste gentlemen who are there. I spoke with our on-site inspector who is there several times a week, all day, sunrise to sunset when they take waste. You know, I've talked to them.
Try Google?
Well, I don't know that that's the most reliable source of information. Well, right, but I would, and you know, I've seen different things. Well, what I really need is someone to talk to. That's when I'm going to feel most comfortable. So that would be great. And let me give you my business card. Because those types of things are things that we do follow up on. We take those very seriously.
And let me say this on your behalf. I'll say this on your behalf. I realize that the agency has some strict regulations of its own and procedures of its own to follow, and you always have to be aware of the legal implications when things like that come up between New York State, and a private business. I understand that, and I think probably a lot of people here do too. So on your behalf, I would say you do have to have reliable information to be sure that if you make a statement, or if you sign a document, or if you say this has to be done, that you're protected from being sued or Governor Cuomo calling you up and saying, Mary Jane, I'm sorry, but
no, I don't think
you don't want to get any of those messages.
But honestly, we do. We are a regulatory agency. We have so much authority. We you know, this isn't a police state. We don't get everything we want. I would like a lot more, but I have to be able to justify it within my regulatory authority. And we walk a line. You're absolutely right. We're walking a line between, you know, what does this group want? What does that group want? What does this industry want? What does that industry want? And you basically are trying to discuss and compromise and communicate through venues like this. And again, I'm going to encourage people to communicate with me over your concerns. I do return phone calls. I don't know. Sometimes, like this afternoon, I was on my way down here, and I'm not going to be back in the office till tomorrow morning, you know, bright and early. But I will get back to you.
Okay.
And that's important. If you get anything out of tonight,
wait, Jim.
It's if you hear something, if you have a concern, please call me.
Okay. I want to go to question 22. It's under the section stink.
Your word, not mine.
No, it's on the paper.
Okay.
People. It's a technical term.
Yes.
People have observed a stink, possibly on transfer of waste from Seneca Metals. That's more of a statement than is a question. But does this stink originate when the trucks transfer the waste into the processing facility, or do you know what the origin of that stink might be?
Well, when the trucks come up and deliver the leachate into that equalization tank, that tank has a vent. It's vented, and that was where we believe the odors were coming from, or stink.
Are, not were.
Okay.
Are. They still are.
Well, a couple months ago, and I think in mid-November, the company they can collect the vapors from there, and they put it through carbon treatment, and that treats it. So they are doing that, and I'm not aware of odor or stink complaint since then. So I haven't got one, so
right.
I don't know.
Well,
how
you have to
react.
consider that the residents in the village, especially those that do their grocery shopping at Price Chopper, which is directly adjacent to the place where they unload that stuff, get that going in the door and then coming out the door with their groceries. It's not appetizing, to say the very least. And it continues. Whether or not any of the residents would file a complaint is another question, but which, again, this goes back to the self-reporting thing. If the residents don't do something and come to a group like ours, or if they, as individuals, don't file a complaint, then what we're left with is the company to say, oh, we know something stinks, and we're going to do something about it, and then make a statement. But they don't do that. So we need, the residents of the village and the people that live here need some way to get the reporting of that stink more often, so that something can be taken care of. Now, I'm going to caveat that with one statement. Everybody knows that we've had trouble with the smell coming from the Johnson City sewage treatment plant for years, and it's affected people driving down Old Vestal Road and all that. And they finally spent a lot of money, and they were finally able to quell it to a certain degree. But you can still smell it.
And that plant's going to get better.
And that's going to get better, but it's still taking time.
Yes.
And so again, that goes to the same issue here. How much time are the residents going to have to wait before they can actually deal with the smell coming across the fence into that area. Well,
I'm not aware of odor complaints since then, but if people call our office, call the number, you know, I'll give you the number. If they call, then we'll go over there, we'll verify it, and
on the smell.
John
Okay.
responded to that.
Right, back actually September 11th, there was someone did call, and yes, 2013. Mid-November, they actually hooked up the ductwork to the activated carbon. So, and as a result of that, I mean, obviously very concerned about it. I am locally out of the Kirkwood office. I live right in Endwell. So, you know, I've actually spent, you know, at least a few dozen times coming down the morning, afternoon, when they actually had the tanker trucks there offloading. And Price Chopper is a perfect spot, location, where they have the smoking tent. And some of the ladies and gentlemen go out to, hey, have you smelled anything? Oh, yeah, we smelled something. And they definitely have. But actually that day, there weren't any odors. And that was when they actually had the activated carbon on. So as a result, I really haven't noticed any odors, with the exception of driving by on Clark Street. There's a slight odor, windows down, going real slow, maybe about 100, 200 feet, the odor dissipates. So absolutely, I mean, we'd be very interested in knowing if there are any odors that the residents have noticed.
You can take an easy air sample anytime after 11 o'clock on Lincoln Avenue, right in the end. Friday night.
Lincoln Avenue, okay.
Throughout the weekend, I'm telling you, the state kicks up at 10 o'clock and dies off by Monday morning.
Lincoln Ave.
Lincoln Avenue, I live there.
Is it just on the weekends?
Yeah, he's pointing out that it's the weekend, so we want to make sure that the operation
Because my
is
theory is that once code ain't working Friday night, it's a free-for-all across the street. No one from DEC or DEP.
Yeah.
I mean, my landlord didn't tell me, even though there's a law that says they have to tell you they're renting in the Superfund site. None of that information was disclosed, so that, trust me, doesn't buy a whole lot of faith.
Yeah, I'd like to get your name and number.
That's E-E-P-L-E-Y.
Okay.
I'm on the sign-in list, we name at Yahoo. Seriously, because we've had code enforcement standing in the building, look me dead in the face and tell me, I don't detect any odor. Meanwhile, the people in the apartment below me, they're getting nosebleeds and getting taken out in ambulances.
Okay.
And
Well, we definitely, we
emotion, it's just.
that's okay.
That's the thing. I live there. I gotta close all my windows and breathe through a damn CPAP.
We try to sleep through that every night.
So yeah, it's not a past tense affair. Thanks for your patience.
Absolutely.
And that is, and my concern is that something different may be occurring on the weekend, and we need to make sure that.
It's plain as the nose on your face. At 11 o'clock, open the window.
Okay. All right. We'll do some follow-up on that.
I'll come up and pick you up and go over to Lincoln Avenue.
Yeah?
Let me know.
I will.